Rain lashed against the diner window as Andrew poured another cup of cheap, bitter coffee. He had no idea the shivering woman huddled by the dumpster was Viviana Sterling, a ruthless tech billionaire presumed dead. One bowl of soup changed everything, bringing high-powered lawyers and a dangerous corporate conspiracy straight to his doorstep. Winter in Chicago did not forgive those who were unprepared, and Andrew Pendleton knew this better than anyone. At 32, Andrew was a single father carrying the weight of the world on his grease-stained shoulders. His wife Sarah had passed away 3 years prior, leaving him with mounting medical debt and their beautiful, fragile daughter Lily. Lily had a congenital heart condition, and the cost of her specialized medication dictated every choice Andrew made. It was why he worked the day shift at a local hardware store and the night shift as a line cook and closer at Miller's Crossing Diner, a rundown establishment on the edge of the city's industrial district. It was a Tuesday in mid-November, the kind of night where the wind off Lake Michigan felt like it was laced with broken glass. The diner was empty, save for an elderly truck driver asleep in a corner booth and the hum of the flickering neon sign out front. Andrew wiped down the Formica counter for the third time, his mind calculating the agonizing math of his upcoming paycheck. Rent was due. Lily's prescription refill was due. He was $80 short, a gap that felt as wide as the Grand Canyon. As he glanced toward the window, a movement in the alleyway in Ireland Dawes. Under the pale glow of a street lamp, a figure was huddled against the diner's brick wall, partially shielded by the commercial dumpster. It was a woman. She was wrapped in a filthy, oversized wool coat, her face obscured by a torn scarf and a matted beanie. She was shivering violently, her knees pulled tight to her chest. Andrew's manager, a gruff man named Greg, emerged from the back office, zipping up his parka. "Lock the doors in 10, Artie," Greg muttered, jingling his keys. "And if that vagrant is still by the trash, call the cops. I don't want them scaring off the morning rush." "Sure, Greg. Have a good night," Andrew replied, his voice neutral. Once Greg's taillights faded down the icy street, Andrew looked back at the woman. He knew the protocol. He knew he couldn't afford to lose this job by breaking the rules. But as he watched her press her bare, purple-tinged hands against her face for warmth, he thought of Sarah. He thought of how quickly life could unravel, how thin the line was between a warm bed and the freezing pavement. Andrew locked the front door, turned the sign to closed, and walked into the kitchen. He ladled a generous portion of the evening's leftover beef stew, his own allotted shift meal, into a heavy ceramic bowl. He added 3 thick slices of buttered sourdough bread and poured a large paper cup of steaming black coffee. Stepping out the back door, the wind immediately bit through Andrew's thin flannel shirt. He approached the woman cautiously. "Hey," he said softly, not wanting to startle her. "Hey, miss." The woman flinched, pulling herself tighter into a ball. When she slowly looked up, Andrew was taken aback. Despite the dirt smeared across her cheeks and the hollow exhaustion in her features, her eyes were piercingly sharp. They were a striking, icy blue, and they didn't hold the vacant, broken stare Andrew usually saw in the transient population. They were alert, calculating, and deeply paranoid. "I'm not calling the police," Andrew said quickly, kneeling to her level and holding out the tray. "But you're going to freeze to death out here. I brought you some hot food. My shift meal." She stared at the bowl of stew, the steam rising into the frigid air, and then looked back at Andrew. For a long moment, she didn't move. It was as if she was trying to decipher a complex puzzle, evaluating him for a trap. Why? Her voice was raspy, cracked from the cold, but carried an undeniable edge of authority that felt entirely out of place in the grim alley. "Because it's 19 degrees out here," Andrew said simply, "and I don't need the food as much as you do. Go ahead, take it." Slowly, a trembling hand emerged from the oversized sleeve of her coat. She took the bowl, her fingers brushing his. Her skin was ice cold. She didn't devour the food like a starving animal, which Andrew expected. Instead, she ate methodically, deliberately, as if fueling a machine. "You can eat it inside," Andrew offered, gesturing to the back door. "I have to clean the kitchen for another hour." "It's warm in there." The woman hesitated, her eyes darting toward the street, scanning the shadows. "No," she said firmly. "Out here is safer." Andrew frowned, puzzled by her word choice. "Safer? All right. Suit yourself. I'll leave the coffee. Leave the bowl by the door when you're done." He turned to go back inside when she spoke again. "What is your name?" "Andrew. Andrew Pendleton." She stared at him, memorizing his face. "Andrew Pendleton. I will not forget this, Andrew." Andrew offered a sad smile. "Just stay warm, miss." He spent the next hour scrubbing down the grill and mopping the linoleum floors. When he finally opened the back door to take out the trash, the woman was gone. The ceramic bowl was washed perfectly clean with snow and set neatly on the steps. Beneath the bowl, tucked away from the wind, was a silver pen. It looked heavy, expensive, with an intricate stylized S engraved on the clip. Andrew picked it up, turned it over in his calloused hands, and slipped it into his pocket, thinking nothing more of it than a strange tip from a strange night. He locked up the diner and began his long walk home to his daughter, bracing himself against the brutal winter wind. 3 weeks passed, and the bitter memory of the shivering woman faded into the relentless, grinding reality of Andrew's life. Things had gone from difficult to desperate. Lily had caught a severe upper respiratory infection, a terrifying complication given her heart condition. She had spent 4 days in the pediatric ward of Chicago Memorial Hospital. The doctors had managed to stabilize her, but the resulting medical bill was a financial death sentence. Andrew sat at his small, wobbly kitchen table, the harsh glare of the bare overhead bulb illuminating a stack of past due notices. He ran his hands through his thinning hair, a knot of pure panic tightening in his chest. His landlord, a ruthless man named Carmichael, had slapped a 3-day pay-or-quit eviction notice on his door that morning. Andrew had exactly $32 in his checking account. From the tiny living room, Lily coughed a dry, rattling sound that made Andrew's heart clench. She was asleep on the worn sofa, wrapped in her favorite faded yellow blanket. The television was on mute, tuned to a local news station to provide some ambient light. Andrew looked at the TV screen. A breaking news banner flashed across the bottom. Corporate, shake-up at Sterling Helios. CFO Richard Croft assumes CEO role following Viviana Sterling's tragic disappearance. Andrew glanced at the screen, seeing a glossy photograph of a stunning, impeccably dressed woman in her late 30s, alongside a smug-looking man in a tailored suit. The news anchor's mouth moved silently, detailing the mysterious boat accident that had supposedly claimed the life of the billionaire biotech magnate. Andrew didn't care about billionaires. Their world was a different planet entirely. He just needed $1,200 by Friday, or he and Lily would be sleeping in his rusty 2004 Honda Civic. He stood up, intending to turn off the TV to save a few pennies on the electric bill, when a sharp, authoritative knock echoed through the small apartment. Andrew froze. It was 9:30 p.m. Nobody knocked on a door in this neighborhood at this hour with good intentions. His first thought was Carmichael, coming to scream about the rent early. His second thought was worse debt collectors. He moved quietly, checking that the deadbolt was secured before peering through the scratched peephole. Standing in the dimly lit, stained hallway were 2 men. They did not look like debt collectors, and they certainly didn't look like they belonged in a dilapidated apartment complex on the south side. Both wore immaculate dark wool overcoats and pristine leather gloves. The man in front was older, distinguished, with silver hair swept neatly back and a leather briefcase clutched in his hand. The man behind him was built like a heavyweight boxer, his eyes scanning the hallway with professional vigilance. Andrew kept the chain on and cracked the door open an inch. "Who are you? What do you want?" "Mr. Andrew Pendleton?" the older man asked. His voice was smooth, cultured, and carried an undeniable weight of authority. "Depends on who's asking." "My name is Harrison Caldwell," the man said, retrieving a sleek embossed business card from his breast pocket and sliding it through the crack in the door. "I am the senior managing partner at Caldwell, Hayes, and Sterling. I represent a mutual acquaintance of ours." Andrew glanced at the card. It screamed old money. "I don't know any lawyers, and I definitely don't know anyone who can afford you. You have the wrong apartment." "I assure you I do not," Caldwell replied calmly. 3 weeks ago, behind Miller's Crossing Diner, you provided food, warmth, and a remarkable degree of human decency to a woman who was in grave danger. Andrew's breath hitched. He thought back to the icy blue eyes, The expensive silver pen, the bizarre paranoia, the homeless woman? She is far from homeless, Mr. Pendleton, Caldwell said, his tone turning grave. Her name is Viviana Sterling. And because of your actions that night, she survived an assassination attempt orchestrated by her own board of directors. Andrew felt the blood drain from his face. He looked past the lawyer to the muted television screen, where the photograph of the missing billionaire CEO was still glowing. The immaculate hair, the designer clothes, it was impossible. But as Andrew stared at the woman on the screen, he looked at her eyes. Piercing, icy, blue. "May we come in, Andrew?" Caldwell asked, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Time is of the essence, and it is entirely possible that my security team is not the only group of people who tracked you down tonight. Richard Croft's men are sweeping the city, looking for the man who aided a ghost." Andrew looked back at Lily, sleeping peacefully on the couch, completely unaware that a billionaire's lethal corporate war had just arrived at their front door. The knot in his chest exploded into sheer terror. He reached up, his trembling fingers sliding the heavy brass chain out of its slot. Harrison Caldwell stepped over the threshold, his polished Oxford shoes clicking against the warped, peeling linoleum of Andrew's entryway. The large bodyguard, introduced briefly as Briggs, followed silently, his massive frame instantly making the claustrophobic apartment feel even smaller. Briggs immediately moved to the living room window, pulling the faded blinds shut with a sharp tug and scanning the street below through a narrow slit. Andrew's heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He backed up, instinctively, placing himself between these strangers and the couch where Lily slept. "Keep your voice down," Andrew hissed, his protective instincts overriding his terror. "My daughter has a bad heart. She just got out of Rush University Medical Center. If you wake her and she panics, it could trigger an arrhythmia." Caldwell's sharp eyes softened fractionally as he looked at the fragile girl under the yellow blanket. "I understand, Mr. Pendleton, and I apologize for the intrusion, but I must impress upon you the severity of this situation. The woman you fed, Viviana Sterling, is currently the target of a highly sophisticated, deeply embedded corporate coup." Andrew crossed his arms, his mind struggling to process the absurdity of the situation. "I serve eggs and burgers, Mr. Caldwell. I don't know anything about corporate coups. A woman was freezing outside my diner. I gave her some stew. That's it. Why are you here?" Caldwell set his leather briefcase on the wobbly kitchen table and clicked open the brass latches. 2 days before you met her, Viviana was drugged during a private yacht excursion on Lake Michigan. The narrative released to the press, the one currently playing on your television, is that a sudden squall swept her overboard. A tragic accident. Caldwell pulled out a glossy folder. In reality, her chief financial officer, Richard Croft, paid the private security detail to poison her and dump her body in the harbor. Andrew felt a chill creep up his spine. But she didn't die. No. She possesses a remarkable will to survive, Caldwell said, his voice laced with grim admiration. She managed to swim to an industrial pier in the freezing water. By the time she dragged herself into the city, she was suffering from severe hypothermia, chemical poisoning, and shock. She knew she couldn't go to a hospital. Croft owns half the private medical boards in this city, and his men were watching the emergency rooms. She had to stay off the grid, hiding in alleys, until the toxins flushed from her system and she could reach a secure communication line. Caldwell pointed a manicured finger at Andrew. You found her at her absolute lowest point. Her core temperature was dropping to fatal levels. The hot meal you provided, the caloric energy, the warmth, the brief shelter from the wind, gave her the physical strength to walk the remaining 3 miles to a secondary safe house. You saved her life, Andrew. Andrew rubbed his tired eyes. Okay, I'm glad she's alive. Really, I am. But why come here? If she's safe, why involve me? Because you kept the pen, a new, raspy voice interjected. Andrew jumped. Briggs, the silent giant at the window, hadn't spoken. The voice came from a sleek smartphone Caldwell had placed on the table. The screen was dark, but a secure audio line was open. Viviana? Caldwell asked the phone. I am here, Harrison, the voice crackled. It was stronger than it had been in the alley, stripped of the shivering vulnerability, but Andrew recognized the underlying authority immediately. Hello. Andrew, I told you I would not forget. Andrew instinctively reached into his pocket. His fingers brushed the cold, heavy metal of the silver pen the woman had left under the ceramic bowl. He pulled it out, holding it up under the harsh kitchen light. The engraved S gleamed. It wasn't a tip, Viviana's voice emanated from the speaker. I knew I was being hunted. I knew my physical state was deteriorating. I didn't know if I would make it through the night. That pen contains a concealed, encrypted microdrive. It holds the biometric keys to my offshore accounts, but more importantly, it holds the raw data logs proving Richard Croft embezzled $800 million from Sterling Helios's experimental biotech division. He needs that drive to destroy the evidence. I need it to send him to federal prison. Then take it, Andrew said, holding the pen out toward Caldwell. Take it and leave us alone. It is not that simple, Caldwell said grimly, ignoring the outstretched pen. Croft's fixers accessed the city's traffic cameras. They tracked Viviana's movements to the alley behind Miller's Crossing Diner. They have footage of you handing her the food, and they have footage of you picking up an object she left behind. They know who you are, Andrew, and they know where you live. Before Andrew could process the sheer weight of that statement, Briggs suddenly stepped back from the window, his hand diving inside his coat. Mr. Caldwell. We have a problem, Briggs said, his voice a low, urgent rumble. 3 unmarked black SUVs just boxed in my vehicle on the street. Armed men are exiting. They are moving toward the front entrance of the building. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded Andrew's veins. No, 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 my daughter. Pack her medication, Caldwell ordered, slamming his briefcase shut. The polite, cultured lawyer vanished, replaced by a hardened operative. Briggs, clear a path to the fire escape. We are leaving, now. Andrew didn't hesitate. He sprinted to the cramped bathroom, sweeping Lily's pill bottles into a plastic grocery bag. He ran back to the living room and scooped his daughter into his arms, wrapping the yellow blanket tightly around her. Lily stirred, her small hands grabbing his shirt. Daddy, what's going on? She mumbled, her eyes heavy with sleep and fever. We're going on a trip, baby, Andrew lied, his voice remarkably steady despite the terror threatening to choke him. Just keep your eyes closed. Daddy's got you. A tremendous crash echoed from the hallway outside. Someone had just kicked in the door to the neighbor's apartment across the hall. Shouts in Russian and English bled through the thin walls. Briggs kicked the latch off the kitchen window, shoving the rusted frame upward. The biting Chicago wind howled into the apartment. Go! The bodyguard barked, drawing a suppressed matte black pistol from his shoulder holster. Andrew climbed through the window onto the rusted iron grating of the fire escape, clutching Lily tightly to his chest. Caldwell followed with surprising agility for a man his age. They descended the iron stairs into the dark, trash-strewn alley, just as the splintering sound of Andrew's front door, giving way, echoed from above. This way, Caldwell whispered, leading them sprinting down the icy alleyway. 2 blocks over, a sleek, armored Mercedes Sprinter van sat idling in the shadows. The side door slid open automatically, and Caldwell shoved Andrew and Lily inside before diving in himself. The van's tires squealed against the frozen asphalt as it tore away into the night, leaving Andrew's old life completely destroyed in its wake. The armored van drove for over an hour, leaving the grimy, sodium-lit streets of the South Side far behind. They passed through the affluent, heavily wooded suburbs of Lake Forest, finally turning down a private, winding driveway flanked by towering, snow-covered evergreens. They passed through 2 heavily fortified iron gates before the van stopped in the underground garage of a sprawling, ultra-modern estate. Andrew stepped out of the vehicle, his legs trembling from the adrenaline crash. Lily was fully awake now, clinging to his neck, her wide eyes taking in the polished concrete floors, the fleet of luxury vehicles, and the armed security personnel patrolling the perimeter. Welcome to Sanctuary, Caldwell said, straightening his tie as if they hadn't just fled a hit squad. Please, follow me. They were led up a private elevator and into a sprawling living area that looked like a spread from Architectural Digest. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the dark, churning waters of Lake Michigan. A massive stone fireplace crackled with warmth, but Andrew barely noticed the luxury. His focus was on the woman standing by the fire. It was her. Viviana Sterling looked nothing like the broken, freezing vagrant from the diner alley. She was dressed in a pristine white cashmere sweater and dark, tailored slacks. Her dark hair was immaculately styled, though her skin still bore an unnatural, sickly pallor, and a discreet IV line was taped to the back of her left hand, trailing to a mobile stand beside her. When she saw Andrew, she stepped forward. The icy blue eyes were the same, but the paranoia had been replaced by a fierce, focused intensity. "Andrew," she said. Her voice was smoother now, commanding, yet laced with genuine gratitude. "Miss Sterling," Andrew replied, instinctively tightening his grip on Lily. Viviana's gaze dropped to the little girl. The hard edges of the billionaire CEO softened. "And this must be Lily." She gestured toward a doorway where an older man in a white medical coat stood waiting. "Andrew, this is Dr. Aris. Excuse me, Dr. Philip Stanton. He is one of the premier pediatric cardiologists in the country. He has a fully equipped medical suite down the hall. Let him examine Lily. She needs rest, and I imagine you need to know she is safe." Andrew hesitated, his protective instincts warring with his exhaustion. He looked at Caldwell, then back to Viviana. "I give you my word?" "Andrew," Viviana said softly, "nothing will harm her here." Andrew knelt, looking into Lily's pale face. "Go with the doctor, sweetie. I'll be right outside. He's going to make sure your chest feels better." Once Dr. Stanton gently led Lily away, the atmosphere in the room shifted. It became instantly colder, strictly business. Viviana walked to a massive oak desk and poured 2 glasses of amber liquid, handing one to Andrew. He took it, though he didn't drink. "I ruined your life tonight, Andrew," Viviana stated, taking a sip from her glass. "Your apartment is compromised. You can never return to your job. Croft's men will systematically destroy everything connected to you to find me." "Then why did you drag me into this?" Andrew asked, a flash of anger cutting through his fear. "I just gave you a bowl of stew. I didn't ask to be hunted by mercenaries." "You didn't ask, but you are involved," Viviana countered, her tone unapologetic. "If Caldwell hadn't pulled you out tonight, Croft's men would have tortured you until you handed over the pen, and then they would have killed you and your daughter to tie up loose ends. By bringing you here, I saved your life, just as you saved mine." She set her glass down. "Do you have it?" Andrew reached into his pocket and placed the heavy silver pen on the oak desk. Viviana stared at it, letting out a breath she seemed to have been holding for weeks. She pressed a hidden sequence on the pen's clip. With a soft click, the top portion detached, revealing a small, sophisticated USB drive. "This is the kill shot," Viviana murmured. She plugged the drive into a sleek laptop on her desk. Lines of code immediately cascaded down the screen. "Croft thinks he has won. He thinks I am dead. And tomorrow at 9:00 a.m., he is going to announce a merger that will dissolve Sterling Helios's biotech division and sell its patents to the highest bidder." Andrew frowned. "Patents? For what?" Viviana stopped typing and looked at him. "For a synthetic enzyme compound. It's a revolutionary treatment for congenital heart defects in children. It permanently repairs damaged ventricular tissue. We were going to release it at cost, effectively curing the condition for millions of families." Andrew felt the breath knocked out of him. He thought of the crippling medical bills, the terrifying nights listening to Lily struggle to breathe, the medication that barely kept her alive but drained his bank account. You have a cure?" "We did," Viviana said grimly, but Croft realized that a permanent cure isn't profitable. He wants to sell the patent to a pharmaceutical conglomerate that will synthesize it into a daily management drug. They will charge thousands of dollars a month for it. People like you, Andrew, will spend the rest of your lives working yourselves to death just to keep your children breathing. A profound, white-hot rage ignited in Andrew's chest. The fear vanished, replaced by a visceral hatred for a man he had never met. Richard Croft wasn't just a greedy billionaire. He was a monster, trading children's lives for stock options. "What do we do?" Andrew asked, his voice deadly calm. Viviana smiled, a sharp, predatory expression. "We burn his empire to the ground. Caldwell?" Caldwell stepped forward, holding a tablet. "I have the federal authorities on standby. Once the encrypted data from the pen is uploaded to the SEC and the FBI servers, Croft will be arrested for fraud, embezzlement, and attempted murder." "Upload it," Viviana ordered. She pressed the execute key. A progress bar appeared on the screen. 10%, 20%. Suddenly, the lights in the sprawling living room flickered. The digital progress bar froze at 42%. A high-pitched alarm began wailing from the estate's security panels. Briggs burst into the room, his face pale. "Miss Sterling!" The network just went dark. Someone is overriding the firewall from the outside. "Impossible!" Viviana snapped, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "This connection is hardwired to a private satellite." "Not anymore," Caldwell said, looking at his tablet in horror. Croft didn't just track the pen's location, he planted a dormant tracing worm inside the biometric scanner. The moment you plugged it in, it broadcast our exact GPS coordinates. Briggs racked the slide of his pistol. "We have a massive perimeter breach. Multiple heavily armed hostiles are cutting through the front gates. They aren't trying to be quiet anymore. They've come to finish the job." Andrew looked toward the hallway where Lily was resting. The sanctuary had just become a slaughterhouse. Gunfire erupted from the lower levels, a deafening staccato that shook the reinforced floorboards of the billionaire's estate. The illusion of safety shattered instantly, replaced by the acrid smell of burning ozone as the estate's automated security protocols engaged. Heavy steel shutters slammed down over the floor-to-ceiling windows, plunging the sprawling living room into a claustrophobic, flashing red emergency light. "Briggs, hold the main stairwell!" Caldwell shouted, drawing a compact sidearm from his coat. The distinguished lawyer moved with the lethal precision of a military veteran, taking cover behind a massive marble pillar. Andrew didn't wait for permission or instructions. His mind went entirely blank, save for one consuming, terrifying thought. Lily. He bolted down the corridor toward the medical wing, his boots slipping on the polished hardwood floors. Behind him, the roar of automatic weapons fire intensified. Briggs was suppressing the intruders, his massive frame positioned at the choke point of the elevator bank, brass casings raining onto the Persian rugs. Andrew slammed his shoulder into the heavy oak door of the medical suite. "Lily!" he screamed. The room was in chaos. Vials of medication and sterilized instruments were scattered across the floor. "Doctor!" Philip Stanton was slumped against the examination table, clutching a bleeding wound on his forehead. Standing over Lily's bed was a man entirely clad in black tactical gear. He wasn't aiming a weapon. He was aggressively unhooking Lily's portable heart monitor, preparing to throw her over his shoulder. Croft's mercenaries weren't just here to kill Viviana, they were securing leverage. They knew Viviana possessed a fatal weakness, a newly discovered sense of gratitude toward the man who saved her. "Get away from her." Andrew roared. The primal instinct of a father protecting his child overrode any rational fear. He didn't have a gun, but he had spent 10 years working in cramped, hazardous kitchens. He knew how to move, and he knew how to improvise. Andrew snatched a heavy, solid steel oxygen cylinder from its wheeled cart. As the mercenary spun around, drawing a combat knife, Andrew swung the cylinder like a baseball bat. The heavy metal connected solidly with the mercenary's helmeted jaw, producing a sickening crunch. The man stumbled backward, his tactical helmet absorbing the worst of the impact, but leaving him disoriented. Before the intruder could recover, Andrew drove his shoulder into the man's chest, tackling him through the glass partition of the adjoining sterile room. Shards of safety glass rained down around them. The mercenary grunted, slashing wildly with the knife. The blade caught Andrew's forearm, slicing through his flannel shirt and drawing a hot line of fire across his skin. But Andrew ignored the pain. He grabbed a handful of the mercenary's tactical vest and slammed his head repeatedly against the tiled floor until the man went limp. Gasping for breath, blood dripping from his arm, Andrew scrambled back to the examination bed. Lily was awake, paralyzed with fear, her tiny hands clutching the faded yellow blanket. "I've got you, baby," Andrew choked out, wrapping her tightly in his arms. "I've got you. Close your eyes." He hauled Dr. Stanton to his feet. The older man was groggy but functional. "We have to move, Doctor. Now," Andrew commanded. They rushed back into the main corridor just as Viviana and Caldwell were falling back. Briggs was laying down, covering fire, his face grim. "There are too many of them," Briggs yelled over the din. "They used thermal breaching charges on the garage doors. We need to reach the vault." "Follow me," Viviana ordered. The billionaire CEO was no longer a victim. She moved with ruthless efficiency, leading the group toward a concealed panel disguised as a bookshelf in her private study. She pressed her bleeding thumb against a hidden biometric scanner. The bookcase slid away, revealing a heavy, vault-like steel door and a spiraling concrete staircase descending into the bedrock beneath the estate. They piled inside, Briggs entering last. He laid down one final burst of suppressive fire before hauling the massive steel door shut. The locking mechanisms engaged with a series of heavy, echoing thuds, sealing them in absolute silence. The underground bunker was a stark, utilitarian concrete room dominated by a massive server rack and the low hum of an independent power generator. Viviana immediately moved to a stainless steel console, booting up the isolated, off-grid terminal. Caldwell leaned against the cold wall, clutching a dark, spreading stain on his wool coat. Dr. Stanton rushed to assist him, ripping open a first aid kit. "Tell me this vault is bomb-proof," Andrew said, his voice shaking. He pressed a gauze pad to his bleeding arm, keeping his other arm wrapped tightly around his terrified daughter. "It can withstand a tactical strike," Viviana replied, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "But Croft knows about this bunker. He knows I have a hard-wired line to the Department of Defense here. They will cut the ventilation and smoke us out." "Then we have a time limit," Briggs stated, checking his weapons magazine. "How long to finish the upload?" "The USB drive is completely corrupted," Viviana said, desperation creeping into her voice. "Croft's malware wiped the localized data. The only copy of the embezzlement logs and the clinical trial data for the synthetic enzyme now exists on my offshore servers in Geneva." Andrew's stomach dropped. "You mean we lost? The cure? It's gone?" Viviana's icy blue eyes locked onto his. "I didn't survive freezing waters and assassination attempts to lose to a glorified accountant." She pulled a delicate silver chain from beneath her sweater, inserting the attached geometric key into a hidden slot. A secondary monitor displayed a complex biometric prompt. "I built a backdoor to Geneva, but it requires a live biometric handshake." Viviana leaned into the retinal scanner. "Voice authentication required," the computer chimed. "Project Lazarus. Override authorization. Sterling, Viviana. Alpha 7 Tango. Access granted. Connecting to Geneva mainframe. I am pulling the data and routing it directly to the SEC and the FBI," Viviana explained. A heavy, rhythmic pounding echoed from the ceiling. Croft's men were setting up thermal drilling equipment to breach the vault. 10 minutes, Briggs assessed, listening to the drills. "Maybe less." "I only need 5, Viviana said. A progress bar appeared. 10%, 20%. Andrew held Lily closer, burying his face in her hair. He thought of the diner, the crushing weight of past due bills, and the sheer terror of almost losing her today. He had stepped into a war among titans, armed with nothing but a bowl of stew. "Andrew," Viviana said softly, not looking away from the screen. "When this is over, you will never have to worry about a hospital bill again. I promise you." "Just finish it," he whispered. Above them, the drilling stopped. 3 agonizing seconds passed. Then, a massive explosion shook the bunker, dropping concrete debris. The heavy steel door groaned, its hinges buckling under the force of shaped C4 charges. "Stand back!" Briggs yelled, aiming his weapon at the breached door. The progress bar hit 85%, 90%. The vault door gave way, crashing onto the floor. Smoke poured in, followed by the laser sights of tactical rifles. Briggs was instantly outnumbered. Silas Mercer stepped through the haze, his face bruised from Andrew's earlier strike. He raised his weapon directly at Viviana's head. "Step away from the terminal," Mercer snarled through broken teeth. Viviana didn't flinch. She hit the enter key with a resounding clack. The progress bar flashed green. 100%. "Upload! Complete! It's done!" Viviana said coldly. "The FBI has the logs. Croft's empire just evaporated. You are working for a federal fugitive who can no longer pay you." Mercer's finger tightened on the trigger. He paid half up front. "That's enough." Suddenly, a deafening roar echoed from outside the heavy, thumping rhythm of military-grade helicopter rotors. Caldwell smiled a bloody, triumphant grin. That fiber optic line triggered a level 1 distress beacon. You aren't dealing with local cops. You're surrounded by the FBI hostage rescue team. The red laser dots wavered. Sirens wailed through the estate above. The tactical advantage evaporated in seconds. Mercer cursed, lowering his weapon and sprinting for the stairs, his men abandoning the contract to save themselves. Briggs secured the doorway, letting the federal agents upstairs do their jobs. Andrew slumped against the concrete wall. Lily clutched to his chest. The adrenaline left his body in a violent rush. Viviana knelt beside them, gently touching Lily's cheek. She looked at the exhausted diner cook who had saved her life. "It's over, Andrew," Viviana whispered, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "We won." 6 months later, Richard Croft was sentenced to consecutive life terms in federal prison. Sterling Helios released the synthetic enzyme patent to the public domain, saving countless lives. On a sunny corner in downtown Chicago, a new restaurant opened its doors. The sign read Lily's Place. Inside, Andrew poured a cup of premium coffee, smiling as his daughter, vibrant and completely healthy, ran laughing through the dining room. If this story of unexpected bravery and corporate betrayal kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. We bring you the most intense, jaw-dropping, real-life dramas every single week. Share this video with your friends and let us know in the comments what you would have done in Andrew's shoes. See you next time.